Hello, and welcome to Learning Target 2.2 in the Ecology unit, Ecological Relationships. Just to give you an overview of what you will be learning about in this learning target, in this particular topic. There's three things that you're going to be expected to be able to know. The first one has to do with something called a niche. We'll talk about what that is in this talk. Part number two has to do with something called symbiosis, understanding mutualism, commensalism, parasitism. And the third part is talking about predator-prey relationships. All three of these things have to do with ecological relationships, or the way that organisms interact with one another in an ecosystem. The first part here is about a niche, and what you need to remember about a niche is that it helps to reduce competition. Now in this picture here, you'll see that there's one tree, a spruce tree, which is a type of pine tree, like a Christmas tree, and three birds. And those three birds are all different species of warbler. A warbler is like one of those small little birds that you see out in New York City, kind of hopping around, pecking at the ground. They're not exactly the same as the warbler, but they're similar. So in this instance, you have three different species of warbler that feed on different parts of the same tree. And as a result of this, they don't compete with one another. So instead of them having to compete for space and resources, they're able to concentrate on their section of the tree, or their niche, and be able to get along okay. And that's exactly what a niche is. A niche is an organism's role in the environment. So the Cape May warbler that you see here, its niche is at the top of the tree. The bay-breasted warbler, its niche is in the middle of the tree. And the yellow-rumped warbler, its niche is at the lower part of the tree. And again, a niche is the role of an organism in the environment, and it reduces competition. Because you can think about it, if these all fed in different parts of the tree that were the same, they'd all be competing for the same resources. Let me show you another example. Here, we can see an example of an estuary, or maybe near the seashore, and you can see there's a variety of different birds that instead of competing for resources, they all are able to survive in this environment because they eat at different levels of the shore. So you have some birds up here called plovers that kind of run up and down the beach. You may have seen them, that kind of looking for food. And then in the middle, you have some ducks that kind of bob up and down. And you have these long-legged flamingos that eat these little things called mollusks. And in this way, a niche is able actually to lead to increased biodiversity, which is just the number of organisms that are living in an environment or an ecosystem. So that's niche. So you should check in with yourself right here at this point. Pause the video and be able to answer these questions. What is a niche? Why is it important in an ecosystem? And how are biodiversity and a niche related? Go ahead, pause it. I'll wait for you. Okay, continuing on. The second part of this learning target has to do with symbiotic relationships. And there's two videos here that you'll watch later on in the activity section. When you look at the word symbiosis, you can break it down into its word roots. So the first part of the word sym means together. And the second part of the word bio means life. So when you put it together, symbiosis is all about how things live together. And these are just relationships between organisms in a community. And just so you know, a community is all the living things in a given area. So just the biotic things. So the plants and the animals and the cells, those are biotic things. When we talk about a community, we're not talking about abiotic factors like the sun and water and soil. So let's talk about commensalism, the first of the three symbiotic relationships that you'll be responsible for knowing about. So in commensalism, the relationship here is one organism benefits while the other organism is unharmed. It doesn't really care what's going on. Science, we represent this as a plus symbol and a zero. The plus represents the organism that is benefiting, and the zero represents the organism that is kind of like, I don't really care what's going on here. It doesn't really bother me or harm me either way. We can represent this also in smiley face symbols just because it's fun. So one organism, thumbs up, is excited, it's benefiting, and here's this other organism that's kind of like, meh, whatever. So that's commensalism. One benefits, one is unharmed. So here's a couple examples. First example is the barnacles on a whale. And the barnacles are all of these things that you see right here. Now these barnacles get a free ride and they get to filter the water that the whale is moving around, and the barnacle doesn't really get bothered that much. It may look like it's hurt by these things, but the barnacles on the whale really doesn't bother the whale. Here's another example. These things floating around the shark, these are called remoras. And remoras are kind of cool because the sharks aren't really interested in eating them, but the remoras get a free lunch or a free dinner anytime that the shark has a meal. So you can imagine that a shark is swimming around, feeds on something like a seal, there's all these parts of food floating around, and the remoras just kind of go around and they pick them off. So the remoras get all the benefit here, and the sharks are kind of like, whatever, I got my meal anyways, so it doesn't really bother me. Here's one more example. Here's some cowbirds and a bison. This bison isn't really harmed by these birds landing on their back. It may not even feel it, but the benefit here to the cowbirds is that when the bison walks through the grass, insects fly out of the way of the bison from the grass, and the cowbird can then fly down and pick them off. So the cowbird is benefiting, and the bison really doesn't care. So that's commensalism. One organism benefits, one is unharmed. Let's get to our next symbiotic relationship, mutualism. Mutualism, well, it has to do with things feeling mutual to one another. Both organisms are in a good mood. They're both benefiting. So in science, we represent this as two pluses, so it's positive and positive. Smiley faces would be two happy faces. Both organisms are happy in this relationship. One of the coolest examples of mutualism is the honey-guide bird and the badger. And this example, what happens is this bird right here is the honey-guide bird, and what it does is it goes and it actually finds a hive of bees where honey is located, and then it comes and actually signals the honey badger and takes the honey badger to where the hive is. And what the honey badger does is it goes and it attacks the hive. It doesn't, the bee stings, believe it or not, don't bother the honey badger, and it rips apart the honeycomb, and whatever's left over, the honey-guide bird eats up. So the badger gets a free meal because it doesn't have to find it itself, and the honey-guide bird gets the leftovers of the honey. Here's another example on the savanna in Africa. In the Great Plains, you have all these different organisms like an ostrich and gazelles, and this thing's called a wildebeest, and they all kind of help each other out looking for predators like lions. And that's mutualism because they all can see in different directions, they can all hear things slightly differently, so they like to hang out together to make sure that they don't get eaten. So they're both benefiting from this relationship. Mutualism. Here's another one, the oxpecker and the rhino. This one's kind of cool because both organisms are benefiting. It's like the cowbird and the bison. What happens here is these oxpecker birds, they're actually eating these little bugs and parasites that might be on the skin of the rhino. So they get a free meal, and the rhino gets all these bugs pecked off of its skin. It's almost like going to the nail salon in some ways, or getting your skin exfoliated. It's kind of nice. All right, so those are your mutualism examples. Parasitism. Yeah, it's hard to say. Look at these different stars. I started this because this one is the most important one for you to know. It shows up all the time on the reading exam. So what's parasitism? Let's break it apart here. First, a para is someone that is attached to something else. You may have heard of a para being in a school setting. So a para is attached to another student. A parasite is something that's attached to another organism. In this relationship, one organism is benefiting and one is being harmed. The organism that is being harmed, though, in this instance is called the host. The host organism. You need to know a host is the one that's being harmed in the relationship. And the one that is doing the harming is called a parasite. The science symbols here are represented by a positive and a negative, so it represents the positive as the one that's getting beneficial relationships from this, a minus being the one that's being harmed. You can imagine what the smiley face symbols look like here. One is pumped up, the parasite gets a meal, and the other one, unfortunately, look at that sad face. Oh, it's devastated. It's being harmed right now because it's the host. So the host is being harmed, and the parasite is gaining in a parasitic relationship, parasitism. So here's some examples. This is mistletoe. Now you may have heard of mistletoe hanging above a tree, and then if you're during the holidays, you're underneath the mistletoe, you're supposed to give someone a kiss. Well, believe it or not, mistletoe is actually a parasite. And what you can see is that it's physically attached to a pine tree. And this is what ends up happening. So down here you can see what it's supposed to look like all the way up. But unfortunately, what's happening is because of the mistletoe, that is sucking the nutrients away from this tree, it's really sparse. So that's one example of parasitism. So which one do you think is the parasite and which one is the host? Good question, right? The mistletoe is the parasite and the spruce tree is the host. Here's another example, the mouse and the flea. As you can imagine, fleas are parasites. The host is the mouse. What does the flea do? Well, it burrows into the fur of the mouse and it sucks the mouse's blood. Here's kind of a cool one. This bird is a warbler, almost like those warblers that you saw in the niche example earlier on. And this is called a cuckoo bird. This bird looks a lot bigger than its mom. But unfortunately, this warbler has no idea that this bird is not its real baby. What happened is the real parent of this cuckoo bird went into this nest of the warbler, kicked out all the eggs, and laid its own eggs. And it left the scene. Oops. And what ended up happening here is this warbler now thinks that this bird is its baby, and it drives itself crazy trying to feed it. So the cuckoo bird makes out, gets all these free meals, and the warbler is harmed because it tries and tries and tries as hard as it can to feed this cuckoo bird. And sometimes it isn't enough. It exhausts itself doing this, parasitism. Ask yourself, and pause the video here, which one's the parasite and which one is the host? I'm not going to tell you this time. You should figure it out. Here's another one. A deer and a tick, or a human and a tick. Ticks are kind of like fleas. These are arachnids, almost like spiders. What they end up doing is they burrow into the skin of the deer. This is actually where the head goes, and it gorges itself on blood. And it actually can end up causing Lyme disease, which is an illness in humans. So here again, which one is the parasite and which one is the host? Pause the video and check with yourself. See if you can figure it out. Okay, so you saw 3 examples of symbiotic relationships. You saw commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. I'm going to give you some questions up here for you to check in with yourself. And I want you to see if you can try to figure out which one is which. Oops. And really, as long as you can justify your response, your answer is okay. So go through in each one and kind of think through in your head, is this mutualism? Is this commensalism? Or is this parasitism? At any point you're not sure about one of these questions, just call me over during class and I can help you out. Okay, that's part 2. One more part of this learning target has to do with predator and prey. Hey, check it out, it's my cousin, the fox. That was a joke. Anyways, so this fox is chasing a mouse. You probably already know that the fox is a predator and the mouse is the prey. But what you may not know is how the populations of these 2 organisms are dependent upon one another. So let's check out this graph. Here's another fox, my other cousin here, and this time the predator is the fox and the prey is the rabbit. So let's see what's going on here. The rabbit is represented by these blue graph, and the fox is represented by the green graph. The first thing you should notice is that there's actually a lot less foxes than there are rabbits, and this has to do with ecosystems and energy pyramids. Remember, as you go up the energy pyramid, less energy is available. So rabbits are herbivore. They're lower down on the energy pyramid, so more energy is available. I mean, there can be more rabbits. That's what this number is. There's a higher population of rabbits. Foxes are higher up on the energy pyramid at the top. They're carnivores. Not as much energy is available up there on the top. And as a result, there's a lower population of foxes. And what you should notice in this graph is the following. A fox population starts out kind of low, but as soon as the rabbit population gets high, then a little bit later, the fox population starts to increase. But as the fox population increases, look what happens to the rabbit population. It drops. There's more predators hunting that prey. So that is the graph that you need to understand, is predator-prey cycles. Okay? So check in with yourself. Ask yourself, what is the difference between a predator and a prey? What's going on in this graph? As one goes up and one goes down, why is that happening? And how are these populations of predators related to each other? Okay, so that's Learning Target 2.2. Hope you enjoyed the video. You'll be verbally quizzed on this after the assessment that you do on Schoology when you're done taking notes. Okay, talk to you soon.